Welcome to Mojo Talks. Today we're talking business with Ash. Welcome, Ash. How you doing?
How are you? Very good.
So, pretty big deal in the business community. Meredith officially took over Time Inc. I think February 1st.
Correct.
So, I mean, Time Inc. is a huge, it's iconic in the media and publishing landscape. Any thoughts on the deal?
Well, yeah, I mean, first off, Time Inc. as a company, including its publications, was a major influence on WatchMojo. It may not be obvious today, even though some of the programming may look and feel like People or Entertainment Weekly, but even Fortune and Time and whatnot. A couple of years ago, I read this book, fantastic book on Henry Luce called The Publisher, the founder of Time Inc. At one point, it was the greatest media company in America. So definitely, had a lot of different thoughts. And
between Fortune, SI, you even have, Life magazine. That was a big deal.
Yeah, Life magazine at one point was like the Instagram of its era, which was basically they relaunched it in 1936, 13 years after Time was formed. So again, iconic company. And I mean, frankly, though, if you want to look at what happened to Time Inc., it is the classic example of the Innovators Dilemma. So the Innovators Dilemma was a book by Clayton Christensen, who's a Harvard professor, and he basically said that, I'm going to read a couple quotes. He goes, basically, outstanding companies can do everything right, yet still lose market leadership or even fail as new unexpected competitors rise and take over the market. To explain, illustrate it in another way, more operationally, he goes, basically, established companies find it very difficult to invest adequate resources in disruptive technologies, usually lower margin opportunities that their customers don't want until their customers want them, and then it's too late. Right? And that basically illustrates what happened to Time Inc. If you compare like their origins as a magazine company with the rise of the internet.
Now, you brought this up in the office. This is obviously pertinent to us. Why was it something that you wanted us to discuss internally?
I, honest to God, always, entrepreneurs are paranoid. If you think of Intel's Andy Grove, only the paranoid survive. So I'm always thinking of that concept of Innovator's Dilemma, right? And Time Inc. was the ultimate Innovator's Dilemma. That being said, I think the reason why it's interesting is take a look at what WatchMojo has started to do. First of all, not just with talks, but with Mojo Plays. We've looked at travel verticals. We used to be very horizontal. So when I read this book, which is a fantastic book if you like this kind of stuff, if you're into Game of Thrones, then yeah, don't read it. But basically, we used to be very horizontal. We had travel content, business content, fashion, food, and all that. And then we kind of focused on pop culture, infotainment, top 10 lists. But as we struggle to say, okay, for us to keep innovating, for us to keep serving our audiences, what are the different verticals that we go in, then it's really, really important for us to understand how did previous companies leverage the leading platform and distribution of their era. Hearst was originally a newspaper company and then it diversified. Time Inc. was a magazine company and it diversified. But even though the irony is, 71 years after Time Inc. launched as a magazine, Time Inc. launched Pathfinder as a portal. But it was losing $15 million a year, and eventually the powers that be decided to shut it down. Now, what's really, really interesting with Time Inc. in particular is there was a lot of M&A, mergers and acquisitions, that ultimately wrote the story for it. Time Inc. was the result of initially Time merging with Turner Broadcasting. And then that created Time Warner. And then in 2000, Time Warner merged with AOL in what was the synergy of all synergies, combining content with distribution. Turned out to be the worst M&A of all time. It evaporated 100 or $200 billion worth of market valuation. And then eventually Time Warner, kind of in that turf battle, the executives at Time Warner emerged victorious. And then they started to spin off units, first AOL and eventually Time Inc. The writing was on the wall when Time Inc., I feel, was saddled with over $1 billion of debt.
Well, so there's this great article in CJR, Who Killed Time Inc.? And there's one particular quote from it that I want to read. No one has figured it out because there's nothing to figure out. It's like the horse trying to figure out the automobile.
Exactly. In 2006, I've mentioned this a few times. If I would have gone out there and asked people, what should WatchMojo produce? They would have said, we want user-generated content in HD. Nobody really was out there seeing a need, a near-term economic need to produce content, right? But we said, hey, we have no traditional business to defend. Let's just be leaders in video. Go big or go home, right? I think the challenge for them was, look at these financials and then you'll kind of understand that you can't really blame them, right? In 2005, Time did $1 billion of profit on nearly $6 billion of revenue. People magazine itself was the big moneymaker, generating $400 million of profit on over $1 billion in revenue. But that started to shrink, and by 2012, it was generating only $400 million of profit on $3 billion of revenue. So less than half those numbers. But because it had $1 billion in debt, it also had to service that debt. Now, a lot of Time execs are like, well, that wasn't really troubling. But if you compare it with News Corp, when News Corp spun out Fox, the TV theatrical business, from the newspaper business, Wall Street Journal and all the other papers, it gave it $2 billion in cash, no debt. So even though I understand why the execs at Time were like, well, it didn't really have an effect, it absolutely, I think, was hard to serve, especially with like a falling sword, which was revenue shrinking. But ultimately, the main takeaway when I say WatchMojo, we've grown, right? We were 5 employees from 2006 till about 2011, 12, then 10. Now we're over 65. So the key takeaway, to paraphrase Bill Clinton's, one of his advisors, Dick Morris, it's the cost model, stupid. The web shrinks industries. There's no way around it. When you compare new media with traditional media, you're comparing something lean, mean, agile with something that has decades, if not a century, of labor practices and just fat. It's like a tree, all the rings around it. So when I see like BuzzFeed, that I respect Jonah Peretti quite a bit. I think BuzzFeed is doing a lot of things well. But when you see BuzzFeed spend tens of millions of dollars trying to figure out their UK strategy, and then they're like, hey, we probably spent a little bit too much money a little bit too quickly, you know, we came away with the same conclusion and we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? So I really think that the lesson is you can't try to replace these businesses that, like, you can't replace the horse if you need to come up with the automotive by building your version of a horse, so to speak.
But let's say Meredith taking over Time. What's going to happen? You mentioned people. What's going to happen to the magazines? Are the magazines going to come together?
Well, I think Meredith, so I struggled with doing this video in particular because, you know, we've had conversations with both Meredith executives and Time Inc. executives over the years. I mean, it's in my 3rd book, so it's already out there. In 2010, I think, you know, there was an executive at MSNBC that reached out and they were interested in acquiring WatchMojo. Very long story short, MSN and NBC got a divorce. That didn't happen. When the executive moved to Time and us, we discussed just a partnership. So our initial kind of idea was, hey, we want to eventually expand into other verticals, say business or travel. Let's just partner. We'll videoify those brands, bring them to the 21st century. The issue with Meredith, however, now owning Time Inc., is Meredith is fundamentally a woman's skewing media company. And
based in the Midwest.
Des Moines. Yeah, Des Moines. I mean, that doesn't matter. Des Moines, you know, been there one time. The main takeaway is, I think, and I don't have any insights into Meredith's thinking, I think Meredith will have to fundamentally ask, do they want to own brands like Fortune and SI that skew male, for one? And 2, Meredith has largely monthly publications, and now they will be inheriting weekly or bi-weekly magazines. And from a production perspective, that is a different beast to tackle. So I think Meredith will have to decide if they want to retain these. I mean, in the end, they could just keep People and, you know, Entertainment Weekly and the things that skew female, and just maybe, you know, offload Fortune and Time and SI, which would be weird, but it is possible.
Those wouldn't fold. I mean, they would go somewhere else.
No, exactly. I mean, I still think that if you own just the URL life.com, you're sitting on a gold mine. Now, again, a URL doesn't mean anything if you don't have a business plan to back it. But I think People is a beast right now. It'll be around forever. But I mean, I think Time Inc., Fortune, SI do have an existential crisis or discussion. Meaning, if you are a millennial or Gen Z viewer, reader, do those brands really mean anything to you? You could argue that Business Insider is more pertinent to an 18 or 28-year-old than Fortune or Money. But there's a window that's closing.
Or maybe Fast Company.
Well, even Fast Company, I mean, that's the thing. Anything that was ultimately a magazine, because of that Innovators Dilemma, struggled to adapt, right? That's the fundamental thing. You do need to be much quicker. Like we alluded in a previous discussion over why Viacom is buying VidCon, VH1 and MTV's inability or lack of willingness and desire to build a web brand is what allowed a WatchMojo to become this brand that means a lot to our fans, right? So I think fundamentally, Meredith needs to figure that out for themselves if they want to keep all these brands. But no, I don't think anybody is going to kill these brands, obviously.
You know,
but sorry, there will be a lot of overlaps. Another thing that, you know, that great article by, give the man the credit, Howard Gold in the CJR said, is there is going to be a little bit of like an awkward discussion when you see the overlap in a lot of these functions, because you're talking about, you know, that's the $500 million a year that Meredith anticipates cutting. It's not, you don't need to read between the lines. There, you know, you don't need 2 HR departments. You don't need 2 finance departments. So if you take, as I alluded to, it's the cost model stupid. A lot of those functions are not going to be in New York. They'll be in Des Moines, Iowa, where it's a lot cheaper to operate.
And you don't need 2 signs. So
Yeah.
big, you know, a lot of hoopla, a lot of talk about Meredith replacing the Time sign with Meredith.
Well, look, I mean, somebody on Twitter did say that when Chemical Bank bought Chase, they kept the Chase brand because Chase was a venerable, iconic brand. Point well taken. That said, I think, like, you know, at the Olympics, they don't sing the runner-up's national anthem. In this case, Meredith acquired Time, and some person at Meredith anonymously in one of the many articles I read said, look, that's just the way it works. I'm not here to second guess anyone. I would, I mean, who cares what I think on this? But if I would have decided that we're going to keep all those male brands, I would have just said it would be clear in the marketplace if Meredith becomes all the woman-centric brands, and Time becomes the male-centric brand. So when you go meet an ad agency, you could present a portfolio targeting, you know, the females, and the portfolio targeting the male viewers and readers. And I would have called the company Meredith Time. And that is not at all second-guessing the fine folks in Des Moines who decided otherwise. I would have probably gone with Meredith Time as a company name, and it's like Showtime. It's Meredith Time, you know.
It's Meredith Time.
It's Meredith Time.
Get ready.
Yeah, but I understand that. I mean, it's whose flag is hailed when you win? The
Yours.
winner. And in this case, Meredith, to their credit, it's the cost model stupid. You know, they have a cost advantage that Time Inc. ultimately didn't have.
Well, there you go. Context is always king. Thanks for joining me, and we'll have plenty more to talk about. There's a lot of business stuff happening in the world. Let us know what you think in the comments, and thank you guys very much. See you soon.